Hi, welcome to the Neshamas podcast. We at Neshamas are on a mission to promote mental and emotional health within our community. Among the many ways we do this is by empowerment through education. This podcast is where we get to listen to personal experiences of those who have been affected by mental illness, the pain, the struggle to get better, and today, by the grace of God, have emerged with a message of hope and healing. My name is Moishe Chanin. I am a grateful addict in recovery, and I am a certified life and addiction recovery coach. I'm here to encourage vulnerability and allow for hope to emerge from the internal journeys we share. Please join me, hear the stories of these heroes, and know that you are not alone. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have a special guest with us. It's Hershel Stevens. He is a relative of mine, and over the years, I've gotten to learn a lot about him. And very quickly, when in a conversation with him, once I decided to do the podcast, it was very clear to me that he has a story worth sharing, and there are many that can gain from it. So welcome, Hershel.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Awesome.
Anytime I get to sit in a room with you is like a blessing.
I appreciate that. So first time I met Hershel was actually when we were in camp. I was his counselor at the time. What Hershel may not know and what people may not know is that now I realize that I was going through a depressive little period, and I was checked out for a lot of it, but still put a lot of effort into it and try to be the best little counselor I can at the time. And the next time I really met him was when his sister married my brother, and then his other sister married my other brother, and so we share a lot and in conversations we were able to connect, and these conversations were able to evolve into very meaningful conversations, which I would like to share with you today. So, firstly, Hershel, again, thank you for being here. And I want me a little bit of a description of what it was like in the beginning, your earliest memories of what life was like, the environment.
From what I can recall, it's kind of weird and kind of feels like boasting to say prodigy child. I don't know. I was the oldest of three sisters. I'm the Bachar, only son. Parents Baal Tshuva. They have a lot of hopes and dreams for you. I remember my mom told me that my grade 1 teacher told my mom that I was going to win the Chidon HaRambam one day. I know that until probably around 8th grade, I never got lower than 100 on a test. Knew how to learn, was really good at it. Always was really good at focusing. Lego was like my favorite thing to play with at home. And I was always like able to sit and like read a book. I was reading like those big fat Yair Weinstock books when I was like 7 years old. It was always pretty quiet, pretty clean. I was like made my bed before I left home at 6:45. So yeah, that's kind of the memories I have as a child. I have a great home. Everything was great. I probably was a little bit of a sheep, just following the system. But yeah, that's kind of recaps what I remember of my childhood.
Awesome. Thank you. If we can, just jump right in. If you can, just give us a description of what it was like the first time you ever looked at life or noticed that something was wrong.
Right. So I think this comes back to me saying that I felt maybe like I was a bit of a sheep. I think I still practice the way, like optically the way it's supposed to, but I remember the first time I started questioning things. I was probably around 7, 8 years old. A guy who was 2 years older than me, also impressionable, told me that when you say Shema and you don't cover your eyeballs start burning. So I said, okay, I'm gonna do it. I waited until I didn't want to just say Shema, and then so I waited until it was like a minion and it was like a legit Shema. I kept my eyes wide open, and nothing happened. I think once you realize that nothing happens, you just start questioning and you start pushing the envelope a little bit. So that was when I can realize that's like the farthest back I can go and say that's when I started thinking on my own.
Got it. And did that lead you anywhere that you think is worth sharing?
I don't know if it led me anywhere, but I think looking back, I can see that I was always, well, as soon as I had to start thinking for myself, I would have been thinking for myself the same way. No matter what would happen, I'd always be a thinker and always be self-exploratory, if that makes sense. And I'd always doubt things. That was my thing.
Got it. And that was when you were 7, 8, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything significant you think may have shifted life?
Yeah. When I was 12 years old in camp, I underwent some sexual trauma with a learning teacher. And it's weird because you kind of get swept up in what happened. But for me, the biggest difference was coming back from camp. I went into 8th grade, and it was interesting. We had the same teacher for grade 7 and grade 8. And he used to say, he was like, Hershel, you're like a different kid. Like, you went away for the summer and I'm having you again the second year and you're like literally a different kid. He would say that, like, he would joke. He's like, you're like bipolar. Yeah, because one week I would be able to sit and learn, and then the next week I couldn't sit still. I couldn't focus on anything. And I didn't realize at the time what was going on. Probably took a couple years until I realized that I can look back at that and say that was a turning point. But
what did you think was going on at the time?
Probably a lot of guilt, a lot of anger. I know anger is a secondary emotion. It's not really what you're feeling. That's your reaction to what you're feeling. I know I was acting very angry, like random blowing up at people. I felt very out of control over myself and my surroundings. I had a very deep seated hatred for any figure of authority. I didn't even know where that came from. Like why all of a sudden I was always a teacher's pet as a kid, and now all of a sudden I'm like, I just want to chop all their heads off. And it's hard to put a finger on guilt, but I'm pretty sure there was a lot of guilt involved.
Right. So that sounds like, and I appreciate you sharing a lot of the emotions. I was wondering if you can connect with what was like some sort of like a narrative that you had going on in your mind. Like what were the words that you would tell yourself in your brain during that period? And I ask that because I'm hoping that somebody listening to it will be like, oh my gosh, I used to tell myself that same thing. So I think that can be important.
So the tricky part is that if I look back at that time, I don't remember any of my self-talk. It was just a whirlwind of emotion. Maybe it's like also going through puberty and stuff like that. You have a lot of emotions, a lot of hormones, a lot of stuff going on, but I don't remember beating myself up in my brain. It was just lashing out, and it was all just being reactive. I was maybe in some points of like retrospect, I would say, I would look in the mirror and say, like, what are you doing? This is not who you are. This is not how you how you react to things. This is not how you behave. But I like that's it. I don't know. I wouldn't have any talk about guilt. I never told myself you're a bad person. It was all just reactionary. I didn't think of anything. I didn't look for an excuse. I just was.
Okay. And with those all those emotions, and I can imagine, and just tell me if I'm mistaken, that it can become overwhelming. Like this polarized idea of the way I should be and the way I am. What did you do with that? Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that was probably, to be honest, the hardest part of the whole situation was trying to wrap my head around the way I am, the way I feel like I'm supposed to be, people's expectations of me. You know, my parents always had, big dreams. My teachers always said good things, and all of a sudden I'm literally throwing it back in their face and saying this is not what I want. So of course it caused a lot of, dissonance inside me, but um I don't like I don't know how I handled it. I probably handled it really badly. I remember years later in therapy trying to find out if what didn't happen to me, if what happened to me was the reason why I ended up the way I am, or whether it would have happened anyway. And I think I came to the conclusion that I would have been, the questioner and the doubter that I am, regardless of whether I had the trauma or not. So that helps a lot with the guilt or the what could have been questions, which to me are the most damaging.
Got it. And can you remember what was the first action you took from that period on? Like, what was the first thing you ever did that was some sort of form of, I have this conflict, I have to do something about it. It's gotten so bad, I have to do something about it. Whether, no matter what it is, I just wanted to know if you can share what you did.
For me, it was totally external. It wasn't a decision that I made to kind of talk about things and try to figure anything out, because I was just reacting. I had a friend in the community who saw me crossing the street, and he said the look on my face looked like I wanted to kill whoever stopped at the stop sign. I was just like stared him down while I crossed the street for like no reason, and he wanted to understand, like, how does a kid get this angry at someone he doesn't know? He ended up speaking to my parents, and my parents said, if you can get him to talk about what's going on, please. He would pull me out of Shir Aleph Masifta, was in Shir Aleph. He would pull me out of class.
So he would come, he was just a regular guy in the community coming
Yeah.
to your school saying, hey, I would like to sit down and speak with Hershel.
I think my parents spoke to, the Rosh Hashiva, and they arranged that, once a week he can come take me out of class. And for me, it was an hour I didn't have to spend in yeshiva, so I was going to take it. I think we spent a good couple months just sitting, me in the passenger seat, him in the driver's seat, just talking about everything until he was able to gain my trust.
Can you give us a little glimpse into that conversation with him? Like, what were the things you talked about? What was his reaction?
A lot of the things we talked about was usually the guilt surrounding growing up from or super Hasidish and then having physiological needs. Um, just that kind of thing that I feel like causes a lot of guilt, especially if you're growing up as a 14-year-old kid. You're not allowed to have any contact with anyone. You're not allowed to learn about what's going on with your body while it's happening, and just tack on the trauma to that. And it just equals a lot of confusion. I think everyone in my class was probably confused at some point. And I guess I was lucky because those guys, my classmates, didn't have a chance to talk to someone who was as open as he was. But being able to talk about it and destigmatize how you're being able to talk about how you feel was a very big opening to me getting better. Um, we talked about everything in that car, and I felt safe. I don't know, I felt like I was able to talk about anything without being judged or thrown out of yeshiva or anything like that.
Can you share, and if you can remember, what were the key things that he did to earn your trust, to allow this conversation to happen?
Um, I remember in the beginning of our conversations, it was very shocking to hear the words he used,
Like what?
um, like penis or sexual attraction. Those all those kind of words are taboo. You don't talk about them. You don't read them. You've never seen them written. Um, so for me, it was like ripping off a band-aid somewhere, and it was like, oh, it took a while to get used to being able to talk about it, but once it started that you can talk about these things and you're not a bad person for even thinking about it, um, it really let the flow to recovery start.
Amazing. And can you talk about anything those conversations led to?
Um, Eventually, he realized that I was going through something, and I was at that point I was still too uncomfortable to tell him uh, that I was molested. Um, he boiled it down for me one day. I think he was getting upset. He was like, "Okay, I earned your trust. Let's do this. Let's tackle it head on." But he gave me three options. He's like, "You're feeling guilty about three things. A, you own a gun and you don't know what to do with yourself or it. B, you're stealing from pushkas and you can't live with that guilt. Or three, someone touched you." And I think he kind of knew which option it was, but I still didn't tell him. It was only a couple weeks later. It was almost Motzei Shabbos. We were in a side room in the shul, and it was dark, so I couldn't see him. And I just said in Hebrew, "Zaya madrich sheli," he was my counselor, and yeah, and it didn't shock him, but for me, it was like that moment felt like ripping off a band-aid, or like, I don't know, a cast that's still on a still broken arm. And he said, "Do you want to tell your parents?" I said, "No, you can tell them." And he had my permission. He went, took my parents to the nearest Starbucks that night. It was Motzei Shabbos. I went back to yeshiva for night seder, pishing my pants. No, just,
What were your fears?
I don't know. It's just super vulnerable. I didn't know how my parents would take it. Because in my life, my parents everything. Um, would my parents hold me accountable at any point? Would they be so upset that they reacted really negatively, and then I would just be more traumatized from seeing them traumatized? Like, I was very nervous. I remember, I don't even know what kind of Seder they do Motzei Shabbos anymore, but I was just sitting there probably trembling the whole time. Um, but my parents came to yeshiva. They took me to the local pizza store that was open Motzei Shabbos late, bought me an ice cream. I sat in the back of the car with my head hiding. And they sat there and they knew I was too uncomfortable for them to look at me. There was no, it was a very like informal gathering, but probably the most important conversation I ever had. My parents, they said, "We want you to know that we're here. What happened to you is not your fault, and we're gonna take care of you no matter what. And nothing will change. Our love for you is still the same. And it's good you told us, because now we can understand and now we can start correcting whatever's going on. And I mean, looking back now, I probably appreciate that a lot more than I did then. I'm still probably scared, but that saved my life right there.
Can we say that those were probably the most important words anybody's ever told you?
100%. Knowing that you are still accepted, no matter how much you're not living up to their expectations, as much as rebellious as you're being, and as difficult as you are, that you're still loved and you still have their unconditional support is everything to any kid, especially a kid who is dealing with a lot of guilt about who they are.
It's so powerful.
I got lucky.
You are very fortunate. Is there I'm just going to throw this question right in here. You're talking about very, very the most extreme personal subjects right now. And I want to know what has motivated you and made you willing to share this here.
I don't think I would have been able to have this conversation or even be in this room if I didn't do the amount of work that I did, the therapy, the talking about it. Eventually, you talk about it so much. I wouldn't say that you're desensitized. I wouldn't say that it doesn't have control, but I would say that the more I talk about it, the easier it gets. And the more I talk about it, the more I own it.
So if you can talk about it to a therapist, why would you be willing? I know this is a bit of a heavy question, but like, yeah, why would you be willing to do this? Because we're going to publicize this.
If this can go out and help one person, even for 30 seconds, make them feel better, it's worth it. I'm not. It's hard to look back at what happened to me and say that there was good that came out of it, because nothing good came out of it. But the question is what I do about it, and letting it own me and letting it take control over how I feel. I'm not going to let that happen. And if there's anyone who can be helped, who will speak, who will feel a little less guilty, who will reach out for the support that they need, I know how much it can save a life. So
I guess that gives us a good glimpse into how painful that experience can be. Because if it's worth it for you to put yourself out there and risk reputation or whatever it is that we would consider a risk, it's worth it for you just to take away 30 seconds of somebody's pain in that position.
I am a Dr. Seuss says it best. He says, "Mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." If someone looks at me differently after this, I don't want them. I don't care to look back anyway. And if the people who care about me will appreciate this. So
yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so just over to the next chapter. From that conversation with your parents, I just wanted to know if you can share, like, what are the different things that you have tried and that you feel like was working, what did not work, and ultimately today, how do you maintain healthy living?
As soon as I spoke up, the search for a therapist begins. I probably saw like a handful of therapists, mostly men, mostly from people, some Lubavitchers, but it's chemistry and it's got to work. Everyone works differently. Took me a while to finally find someone that I trusted. We went, I used to go every week, sometimes twice a week, as needed. You know, you take your dose as needed. It really came to a head at when I was 16 in yeshiva. I was still in yeshiva in Muncie, and I don't think it was really taken very seriously until when I was 16, I guess I felt very rejected. What happened was is that a big chunk of our class all applied to go to LA for Zal, or Shurgim Sifta, and it was around Lag BaOmer time, and 12 kids applied, 11 got in. I was the one who didn't, and this was my chevra. This was like my crew that I, made friends with over the past year, and we did everything together. And they were all going to LA. And I asked my Rosh Yeshiva why I wasn't going, and he said, "You still have to prove it." So I remember I went to the local, I don't know, pharmacy, bought like 2 bottles of Advil liquid gels, extra strength. I was like 100 pounds then, and that was it. I was gonna drink them with a bottle of Smirnoff because there were plenty of those lying around, and that would be it. I was walking to the dorm. My Rosh Yeshiva saw me, and he pulled me over because I'm like really bad at hiding how I feel. So he pulled me aside and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know, depressed." He checked my pocket and found like two bulging pockets. So what's in your pockets? I took them out, and that was enough for him. He took me to the hospital. And I went into a psych ward in what was it, Rockland County. It's not a fun place. It was a very big wake up call for everyone, and that's really when it came to a head. Started seeing a psychiatrist. Started seeing a therapist, even in Muncie, because like when you're in yeshiva, it's hard to find a therapist everywhere you go. But that's when like taking care of it really started in earnest. What else were you talking about?
What was your intention? I know it may seem obvious, but what were you trying to accomplish?
I probably would have chickened out after like 7 pills. I don't know, because I wasn't going to tell anyone. I wasn't on my way to tell someone. I was on my way to do it. But I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to be in pain. I didn't want to live with the way I felt about myself.
What was that?
Worthless?
And that was like a reaction towards not being accepted and everybody else is.
I think it was a reaction to, the being the only person rejected really spoke to me being like
Some
me
mess.
as a person.
Mm.
But the truth is that I was dealing with the trauma from what happened before. So I'm already volatile from what happened there, which made me volatile enough for him to say, "You're not going to LA right away." So like it kind of all stems back to that turning point. But yeah, I always had a really hard time with rejection. I'm a very strong inward perfectionist. Always want myself to be perfect. It's one of the worst things that can happen to a person is to be a perfectionist.
Right. And while we're at it, and you brought that up, what do you think will happen as a result of being perfect? Like, what are you really seeking?
Validation,
That.
self-worth, and the validation. I don't think the validation comes from. I'm not looking for external validation at this point. I'm constantly looking for internal validation, which would come from me being able to pat myself on the back and say, "You did a good job." But when you're a perfectionist, you never do that. You never give yourself a pat on the back. Everyone else does, but you can't.
Do you have any idea what type of therapy you did?
Like what clinically Probably um, a lot of CBT. I think it started off as CBT. Um, Mostly just sitting there talking. Just I don't know what the official term for it is, but I would sit, talk about my thoughts. I'd get it parroted back to me, and then not parroted, more like mirrored. No, what was it called? The proper way to bounce what they said back to you.
Active listening.
No, but when you talk back to them, you say what they said.
Paraphrase.
But it is paraphrasing, but in therapy it's called like mirroring or something, as opposed to parroting, which parroting is you're just saying the same exact words. I'm upset, you're upset. Like, okay, bud.
Um, excuse my laughing. That was funny. After what happened? What was the end of that story? After the psych ward.
Just to show, shout out to my dad, just to show how much my parents played a role in me still being here. My father had planned a ski trip that weekend. He had just landed in Calgary or Edmonton or something. They were going to drive to Banff. He was on a plane when I was admitted, and he got a call when he landed from my mom saying that Hershel's in the hospital in Muncie, and he was halfway to Banff in his rental. He turned around, got on the next flight back to Toronto, and then got into his car and drove down to Muncie so that he didn't have to be locked up for more than 2 days.
What was that a statement for you? What statement was that for you?
That I had their undivided support.
So based on that experience, I wanted to know if you're able to, at this point, just make a statement to any parent that may be listening to this.
To any parent that may be listening, I know seeing your kid hurt is probably the hardest thing to endure as a parent. I don't know because I'm not a father, but I can imagine it's very painful. And it's very confusing because there's more to the trauma that goes on than just dealing with the trauma. There's the after effects and there's the years. But for parents, showing your kid that they'll never lose you and that you're always going to love them no matter what is probably the most important thing that a kid can feel, especially when they're so vulnerable. And if a parent is having a hard time, there's nothing wrong with a parent also getting help, speaking to someone, a professional or anyone, to learn how they can also help the situation. Sometimes a victim doesn't know what they need. And part of their therapy is learning how to communicate to their support system about what they need. And the support system also needs to learn how to listen to what they need and how to deliver the message that they're never going to think of them as less because of what happened to them.
Amazing. Thank you. I know that part of your story is rehab.
Big part.
Can we jump right in that?
Sure.
What led up to that, and what was that experience like?
I think after a couple times, I think it was a couple times I tried to kill myself in quick succession, that they realized that probably sending me away for very intensive, immersive therapy was necessary. I went down to Houston to the Menninger Clinic for 2 months, followed by a 3-month step down program. Um, I was there. It's like an all inclusive cage. Nothing sharp in the entire building. Nothing nothing you can sabotage yourself or anything you're doing with. Very structured, and I was just completely emotionally naked for 2 months with the people around you, with with the staff. It's a very real experience. And there's like you have nothing else to do but face your issues and think about it. And it's rough. It's very hard to just always be conscious of your issues for 2 months straight. But after that, and then transitioning back into normal life and being around people who hide things and don't talk real talk all the time is was a very good thing for me. I know a lot of people who go to rehab and then they don't necessarily have the money or the resources or the time to go to a transition place. And then they come into the world and they don't really know how to react. And everyone seems fake to them. I think I think that transition is almost just as important as the rehab because
Mm.
you got to get back to normal life eventually. And those 2 months where I was in Menninger, I was not having a normal life. Even the 3 months wasn't a normal life, but just learning how to just basic life skills, all these things that you're basically rebuilding yourself. And that I think therapy, if needed, is such an amazing tool. Like a structured environment, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And what do you do today that helps you be many steps away from getting back to where you were before you went to rehab or those other times?
There are days where I feel very far removed. There are days where I feel like it just happened. There are days where I feel like I'm first day out of rehab. Every day is different. I think just time, the more I talk about it, the more I take ownership of it, I gain control and I stop using it as a crutch to excuse myself from living life. I mean things happen in our lives all the time, but I think I'm done with looking back at what happened when I was 12 and saying I'm going to react poorly now because of what happened then.
What do you do today when you notice that, oh, I'm acting poorly for what happened then? What do you do then?
I reach out to my support system. I I've realized over the years that when people say you need to help yourself, that it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of people picture that going into your room and meditating and getting your stuff together, but I don't think I mean it's a big part in helping yourself, but I think being able to reach out to your support system or at least making a support system and being able to communicate with them exactly what you need has helped me tremendously to be able to call a friend and say I can't be alone right now. Let's go see a movie. Even like let's go I don't know, have a beer somewhere. But it's usually simple things that you need that the friends that care about you are more than willing to give. And that's that for me is everything. Being able to reach out to others is you helping yourself.
That's awesome. What's your message for anybody who notices signs of the behavior that you had? For example, the, oh my gosh, you went away for the summer and you changed, or um, somebody who notices, oh, this kid has a really big frown on their face, or like there's something wrong here. or the adult who didn't have any of the experiences that you had in regards to the recovery, but had the trauma, and they're still sitting there today with it raw, and they're dealing with the consequences. So there's different parts of your story where I believe that if people can hear from you who has gone through it and has been able to find a healthy support system, a message for these people.
Get one. Get a healthy support system, because there always is one.
How do you begin?
Tell the people that love you first, or tell someone that you trust to tell the people that love you, like I did with my parents. Um, and again, you have like, it's going to happen that when you reach out to people for support, that some of them are not going to be available. And that's okay, because you can't expect people to be able to give you what you need, because you need it from them. And if they can't give it to you, then you don't want whatever they have to sell anyway. But start with an inner circle, grow from there. The more you talk about it, the easier it gets.
Can I challenge that for a second?
Sure.
I'm trying to put my shoes into a listener who's thinking something like, I actually feel like nobody loves me and I don't trust anybody. I'm in such a bad state and I just don't feel like there's anybody in my life that I can open up to.
Then call me.
How can people reach you?
Facebook, Hershel Stevens. Instagram, Hershel_Stevens, I think. If it's not, I'll change it. I don't know. First of all, I would challenge that nobody loves any, like, I don't think there's one person on this earth that's unloved by everyone. We're all so blessed. It's hard to see it, but we are. And if you are really in a place where you don't feel like you can talk to anyone that you trust, pay someone. Just at least once, go see someone, a professional, tell them what's going on, and maybe build a plan, a recovery plan, something. But nothing's going to get better if you don't get the ball rolling. And I think opening up is the first step. Finding your support system is the second, and they'll help you through the rest of the way.
What can we do as a community to allow that to happen?
Talk about it more. More it's talked about, the less people feel ashamed to be a part of it. But that's the thing, people talk about it, and then there's like polarizing opinions. Victims can't hear the polarizing opinions. If you look on comments on Facebook and you see, he didn't do it, he did it, he didn't do it. Those comments of he didn't do it, or it couldn't be, he was such a nice man, those are the most hurtful for a victim. And we just need to give undying support for anyone who's going through pain. And that's the only way that people will feel comfortable enough to talk about it and get better.
I know that part of your story included organizations or people who were able to be supportive for you. I know that, of course, you had your parents and you had the rabbi and you had the neighbor, you had the Rosh Hashiva, you had all these different people along your path. Are there any others that you can share? Thank them.
Yeah, I'd give a huge shout out to Mayor Seawald at Jewish Community Watch. When I started talking to him, he wasn't even going by his name. Still a secret about who was running the situation. But he went by the name Pinchas, the one who took charge and stabbed the bad people. So, Mayor, if you hear this, keep doing what you do, because you're saving lives on the daily. He really helped me with coming forward and pressing charges, testifying, unconditional support.
What was the biggest part of what he did that made that allowed healing to happen for you?
He called me brother. That was probably the biggest thing. It's kind of weird and out there, and it wasn't for me personally. I mean, he helped my parents a lot by talking to them. He knew an organization in the DA's office here in Brooklyn and stuff like that. But for me, it was when every time I spoke to him, he would just say, "What's going on, brother?" It was like I wasn't alone. There was a team of people that were on my side, and like a brother, they're family, and they don't give up on you. So
That's so powerful.
yeah.
Hershel, thank you so much. What you did today and shared with us is tremendous. And us as a community, myself, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please share your feedback by emailing us at podcast@neshamas.org. We hope you'll be back for the next episode of the Neshamas podcast. This is Moishe Chanin wishing you a healthy and a meaningful day.